we are in a massive paradigm shift. That's what functional medicine is. That's what this book is about, The Pegan Diet. It's really a functional medicine view on food and nutrition and health and longevity.
You talked about insulin resistance as one of the leading causes of chronic disease today. What is insulin resistance? How do we prevent it? And then how do we treat it?
Yes. Well, great question. And I think we hinted about it a little bit before. But, 88% of Americans are in poor metabolic health, right? That's staggering. That's almost 9 out of 10 of us. And that is, poor metabolic health means insulin resistance. And I'm going to unpack that in a minute. 75% are overweight, 42% are obese, 40% of kids are overweight. I mean, it's terrible. 1 in 2 Americans has prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. All this is caused by the amount of starch and sugar in our diet, right? Broccoli is a carbohydrate. That's fine to eat. But white flour is also a carbohydrate. It's worse than sugar in your body. So the volume of starch and sugar, this predominantly our calories, is driving this poor metabolic health. And what happens when you eat starch and sugar, which, by the way, we really didn't have, right, for most of our human history. We basically were hunters and gatherers till 10,000 years ago. And then, if we had grains, we had whole grains. The milling of flour didn't happen until about 150 years ago. And when that started, and they started to actually refine the flour, is when we saw these nutritional deficiencies, like
Really?
like beriberi and pellagra, and these horrible vitamin deficiencies. It was really terrible. And they actually, they actually discovered vitamins because they started depleting the food. So when we eat in a way that has all this starch and sugar, it causes our blood sugar to go up. That causes our insulin to respond to try to keep the blood sugar down. So you can have normal blood sugar if you go to your doctor. You can have a normal A1C, which is your average blood sugar. But if your insulin's high, you're in big trouble. I saw a guy who was 400 pounds. His blood sugar was perfect. His average blood sugar was perfect. His insulin was like 20 times normal because it was keeping everything down.
Oh, man.
Now, insulin gets that high because the body becomes resistant to the effects of the insulin. It's like the boy who cried wolf. So you need more and more and more insulin to get the blood sugar down. More and more insulin. What does that do? Well, insulin has a number of roles. In a small amount, it's good. Keeps your blood sugar good. If you're healthy, fine. If you have no insulin, you get type 1 diabetes, you need insulin shots. But most people have what we call type 2 or prediabetes or insulin resistance. And it turns out that this is the driver of cancer, like the most common cancers: prostate, breast, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer. Heart disease, most heart attacks are caused by this. Diabetes, obviously. Dementia, they're calling type 3 diabetes. Depression. So many issues are driven by this insulin resistance that are burdening our society with chronic disease, which affects 6 out of 10 people. And so when you have this phenomenon in your body, it drives inflammation. It drives fat storage in your belly. It causes more hunger. It slows down your ability to lose weight. And it creates this vicious cycle of muscle loss and fat gain that it's like super fuel on the aging process. That's why you see diabetics, have far more heart attacks. They're 4 times the risk of dementia. They're more likely to get cancer. It's just all related to this phenomena. And if you're talking about the game of longevity, I remember this lecture I heard like 20 plus years ago from a Harvard professor who was talking about, preventive cardiology. He said, Mark, if you could take a group of 100-year-old people who have perfectly clean arteries, they'd have one thing in common. I said, what's that? He says they're insulin sensitive, meaning they are able to easily regulate their blood sugar with very minimal amounts of insulin. But most of us, because they're basically healthy or they have genetics that help them or they eat, well. But the key is to the game of aging is to keep your insulin low, right? And if you keep your insulin low, you're going to be activating all these anti-aging mechanisms in your body. If your insulin's high, you're going to accelerate all the aging. So that's why starch and sugar are poison.
When insulin is high, it's weakening immune system, it's increasing inflammation, which is making you age faster, essentially, and get sick, right?
Yes, and not only that, Lewis, what is happening now with COVID in America? Why are we the worst country in the world with COVID? It's not just political mismanagement. The fact is that we were the sitting duck perfect place for COVID to land and cause havoc. Why?
Because we're obese.
Because we're obese, we're overweight, we have chronic diseases, and these are all diseases of inflammation. So we are pre-inflamed. And when COVID hits, it's like gas on the fire, right? It just blows up your immune system, which is why you see these cytokine storms and this overwhelming inflammation in the body. It's not the virus that kills people. It's people's own bodies' overactive inflammation because it's primed because of our inflammatory diet. And so nobody's talking about